Well, shalomi, my homies. How are you living today? Hopefully courageously. You finding opportunities to just absolutely upend the world, to turn the world upside down. Remember, you were born to turn the world upside down. Don't settle for anything less, even if it's just tiny micro fractures in the foundations of Babylon. We got to drive our wedges of authenticity and truth directly into the hearts of that kingdom. Every chance we get, you guys. Anyways, I hope you're living vibrantly every single day of your life. I got fired up this morning, you guys. It's a new day. It's an exciting time to be alive. I'm rejoicing. The sun is out. Hallelujah. I am looking at these tiny little indicators of spring coming this way, and I am hungry and eager for a season of fantastic living. I hope you guys are too. And you know what? I am treasure hunting right now. I'll tell you that right now. Okay, I've got quite a few books with me today. Some of them you've heard of before. We're going to be referencing out of The Sharith Imperative by Dr. Michael Lake, empowering the remnant to overcome the gates of hell. Fantastic. We're going to hit on spheres of authority, principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, thrones, and, all of those incredible, tyrannically powerful systems that we got to deal with. Another one that we're going to talk about too, because this perpetually just absolutely delights me. The underground history of American education. This should be like fundamental homeschooling lessons for those of you homeschoolers out there. This should be in your library, most assuredly so, especially so that you can equip yourself with the information to communicate to people that are like, why aren't your children in school? And be like, you know why? Let me tell you about the genetic manifesto and the desire of eugenicists to rule over my children and to dominate and infect their minds with tyrannical overlords. Technocracy. They're like, what are you talking about? You'll be like, turn with me for a moment to page 101 in the underground history of American education, and let's address where the Rockefeller Foundation came in and got their hooks in us. Stuff like that. We gotta wage a multifaceted war, right? Some of you that are watching this right now are like in the phase of life where you're trying to like actually deliver your family out of the kingdom of Babylon. And the predominant infectious tool that's been utilized at is the education system, right? The indoctrination system that many of us went through. We came out stupid. Like we really did. We came out dumb by design. You aren't dumb. It's not reality. I know you may struggle with certain things and think and believe the lie that you're stupid or you can't read or you can't comprehend or you can't understand things. And it's not like that for you. Truly, it wasn't made to be that way. People made you like that. They really did. They worked hard to make you stupid. They worked hard to make you ignorant predominantly. But the counter to ignorance, like it says in the scriptures we go over all the time, is the enemy, is his camouflage, his ignorance of the people. So that's his camouflage. It's his main tactic for hiding like a little chameleon, like a very powerful, extremely powerful chameleon beyond our wildest dreams and nightmares. But if we are not ignorant of the schemes of the devil, we are not led captive into his like captivity prisons, into his minefields. And so the more that we can understand the mechanics of how he's doing it, like I put out that video called The Invisible Rainbow, Electric Dragons. That's like one sphere of authority. That's like one sphere of influence that if we are ignorant of the influence that electromagnetic waves have on us, or the presence of electromagnetic fields has on us physiologically, right? Environmentally, on our animals, on our plants, like why our dogs are getting cancer, why are cats dying of heart disease? Like, what the heck? Like, why are these things taking place? That's the right question. Then it's to try to discover the right answer. And maybe from people that aren't financially backed by the very people that are putting out the telecommunications equipment that's being broadcasting everywhere. They shouldn't be the guys doing the study. You know what I'm saying? That's like definitively biased, right? Well, so much of the information that we've been fed and force fed throughout our life comes from people that were financially incentivized to lead us down a path of falsehood, and that's just unfortunately the heart of the kingdom of darkness's tactics and tendrils that have worked its way into so many arenas of our life. But the way that we can uproot that system, I mean, it requires diligent exploration. It requires diligent searching. It requires focused mining. Like it really requires that. So every time like I open up one of these books, whether it's this one or the scriptures or any of these or a dictionary, like I am mining for resources. I am looking for something amidst a sea of words that can help me to understand this world that I am living in, because it is a tapestry that has been woven by many of my enemies. My enemies wrote the history books. My enemies, those who hate us, have been feeding us, have been clothing us, have been watering us, have been giving us these tendrils of torture to keep us alive, but just only so much so. And they keep us from ever coming to know the truth. But I took good courage in the word this morning, and I was thinking about the moment of the Messiah, and his final kind of showdowns that he really had, because he had a face-to-face meal where Satan was present. And I don't think that's like mentioned very often in our minds, or we don't think about it as the Last Supper also being a time when he had a physical showdown with the devil in the room. He clearly had his temptation in the desert, in the wilderness. Do you remember that story? Like they call it the temptation, right? The testing, really better way of saying it, when he had this showdown. We talked about it previously in the series, and how he rebuked the adversary. How did he contend with the devil after that 40 days in the desert? He used the word of the scriptures, right? He used the Torah, the loving instructions of Yahuwah, because his father and his mother had followed the commands of the sovereign, the King of Kings. They followed the commandments that you are to diligently train your children up with these words. And so that in their end, in their later time in life, they won't depart from it. Those of us who are trying to raise our children in authenticity, we have a responsibility to impart upon them these words of understanding, so that when they have to go out and engage in the world economy, in the world system, however much or however little it is, they are well rooted and grounded in love and truth. And it makes them wise and capable, full of knowledge and understanding. Like when we read about Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. It said that they were found to be more full of wisdom, 10 times better than all of their peers. That's how our children should be able to compete and contend with those others of the worldly system. And that's because the type of wisdom that Daniel was well versed in, that Azariah was well versed in, was stupendously different than the Babylonian system that they were raised in. The Babylonian system that they were raised in was one which indoctrinated its children into a pantheistic ideology of fluidity of gods, whereas morality was objective, that there was no absolutism, there was no truths, right? It was interpretive according to one's own volition or desires, and through the interpretation of the priest class that was ruling and reigning at that time, which changed regularly because it was a pantheon of gods. You must understand, these weren't just like imaginary gods. They're like real beings. That's why I call them immortals. When we read in our scriptures where it says gods or idols or demons or masters or mighty ones, like in the scriptures, we it's a very minimized idea in our mind of what these things really are. And because of that, when we actually interact with the scriptures, or when we look back at history, we think pridefully these people were stupid. We think they were ignorant, they didn't understand these things. These people lived during times and seasons when these immortals walked around. Like they actually walked around. They had skin and flesh, and they could do signs and wonders. They could do what would appear to be miracles, magic. These priests could conjure spirits that could talk to people. Like there's real power, real authority, real dominion that could influence the world around them and give them a witness to their authenticity, to their trustworthiness. And so because of that, people did worship them, right? Now, there's times when those gods, those immortals, faded, they disappeared, they were imprisoned, right? Or they were driven out. Like we read about in Baal and the dragon. Daniel has a showdown with a real dragon. He fights dragons. This used to be in our Bibles, but the stinking perverts that ripped it out of our scriptures in the 1800s. That's right. They perverters of justice. They really were perverts. It's disgusting. The American Bible Society, so many of these just disgusting Luciferian organizations that really answer to the beast and not to Yahuwah. They answer to Hillel ben Shahar instead of the King of Kings. And you know what? They ripped our Bibles apart. They literally ripped out 20 books, almost 20 books, so you guys wouldn't have access to them in the 1800s, late 1800s. They were in there for over 200 years. And you're like, okay. So back then, you could have got a lot more of these stories. You could have understood what was taking place in the times of Azariah and Hananiah and Mishael. You'd understand why Daniel came to a place of authority where people respected and revered him a lot more so. You'd have also understood what it was like to have showdowns with dragons, because this was normal back then. In modernity, they're like, it's all dinosaurs, we promise. You can trust us. Universal Studios paid us a lot of money to make this film. I'm telling you, you can trust us. The dinosaurs now, they have feathers. Yeah, you betcha. They got feathers for sure.
We made up this one called Archaeopteryx. Yeah, it's a transitionary evolutionary fossil. You can look it up. We forged it.
Yeah, fraud. All this stuff. Like, I grew up reading textbooks and they're like, yeah, these dinosaurs, you see, these are transitional fossils. They don't exist. Stuff I just want to stab in the heart every single one of these doctrines of demons. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just frustrates me tremendously and gets my blood boiling. We have to be well rooted and grounded in a multifaceted historical analysis of life. We need to understand our history. We need to understand ancient history. We need to understand what this world really looked like in times gone by and how we can compare what we see, how people were taken captive and led into all kinds of terrible bondage back then, so that we can understand, hey, we're going to see similar methods of these adversaries against us to lead us astray. How can we guard ourselves from it? How can we raise up our children to be protected from it? And the way is to be grounded in an understanding of this word. We're going to see the Messiah once again has a showdown with the devil. And remember, the last words that the devil said to him, the dragon, when he went away from the Messiah, after the last time he got rebuked with the sword of the scriptures, he said, he went away from him, waiting for a more opportune time. So understand, like we like to capture one of our favorite animals that we or bugs we like to capture is praying mantises. They're beautiful and they're some of the more successful hunters in the world. Like a dragonfly is the most successful hunter on earth. It kills with unbelievable precision. Like if that thing takes off, something's going to die well over 90% of the time. Whereas like when you let a hawk out, like falconry, like you see hawks diving down to attack mice or if they're going to attack rabbits, like their success rate sometimes can be as low as like 20%, 1 out of 4 times that they're going to hit something and get it. Whereas these certain predators are unbelievably effective. One of those is praying mantises. So we like to capture them and bring them inside our house and we put them in our windowsills and they will decimate flies. They'll decimate bugs. They are incredibly good hunters and they're good companions. A lot of them almost never leave the windowsill and most of them will live for us 6 months, 7 months. It's fantastic. It's one of our favorite things to do. But they are ambush predators. They understand that they don't get in like full on massive like battles. Like a bear can really throw down. A bear will tear your face off, right? They will go toe to toe to you. They are incredibly tough, like a honey badger. They're like just ferocious. They're not scared of anything, right? Whereas a lot of ambush predators understand the fragility. And so because of that, they wait very patiently until there's an exact, precise moment when their prey is unsuspecting the attack. They're not ready for it. They're not defending it. They're not prepared to defend against it. That's their time when they strike. This is literally what the dragon is saying there, like this serpent that is biding its time in the dust, invisible to the eye, just waiting for days and days and days. They are incredibly patient. Their metabolic rate is very, very low. They consume almost no energy, like a giant crocodile, like the dragon of the rivers. They sitting there, you can have a 15-foot crocodile, weighs 1,200 pounds, sitting there. And it's consuming through the course of a day, and on a warm day, maybe 50, 60 calories. They burn almost no energy. So this is why they can eat one time a year. Like I had a red-tailed boa constrictor for a while. And there was seasons where he wouldn't eat for 7 months. He would eat huge rats, and then he just wouldn't eat for months. And that's just a totally different concept of our than that compares to us. So this is why when the enemy like leaves and departs, he's waiting for a more opportune time. He's not joking. Like he really is. And here it is, the very moment that he chooses. Let's go to John chapter 13. You ready for this? And before the festival of Pesach, Yeshua, knowing that his hour had come, that he should move out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper taking place, the devil, having already put it into the heart of Yehuda from Kiriath, son of Shimon, to deliver him up. Yeshua, knowing that the Father had given all into his hands, and that he had come from Elohim and was going to Elohim. Let me just go back a second there. The devil literally put, like his next strike was into the heart of Judas, right? Judas Iscariot. Like this will say Yehuda. If you guys aren't familiar, that's like the actual name of Judas was not Judas, it was Yehuda. So understand that's like the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. That's who betrays him. Understand that's like This couldn't be more of an intimate killing, like for real, intimate betrayal. It's coming from the very people that are like the line of the tribe of Judah is supposed to come from, right? These are his kinsmen, right? Into his heart, the devil had a door of opportunity in order to put this greediness for gain. It said that Judas was a thief, right? He always had his hand in the bag. He was stealing from them and they're like the people that provided the sustenance for them in their ministry. He was stealing from it regularly. It's because the man had a love for silver. That greediness for gain, that love of silver is predominantly the root that gave the enemy an opportunity to plant this seed inside him and it would germinate. He knew that he could tempt him with these things effectively because he had already been transgressing consistently. This was his stronghold of the devil in his life that he had not rooted out. But understand something, Judas was also walking in miracles at times. There's times when Judas is performing miracles, casting out demons, saying, Lord, Lord, saying, Master, Master. He's calling on Yeshua as master at times in his ministry, but inwardly there's a stronghold that is destroying him and is creating in him a vulnerability that's making him literally build a house for the devil himself. And he rose up from supper and laid aside his garments, and having taken a towel, he girded himself. After that, he put water into a basin and began to wash the feet of the taught ones and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. For my wife and I, when we celebrate Passover, one of the greatest gifts you can ever do in your entire life to celebrate the wonderful feast days that Yahuwah had, we can imitate our Savior, like eat the way he ate, observe the Sabbath the way he did, and follow the feast days that he did. Incredible, beautiful blessing, right? We can forego the pagan ideologies of Ishtar's Day and Easter, where they dip in the blood, dip in eggs and blood of children and all the rest of it, and imitating all of these practices of fertility goddesses and bunnies and all the rest. It's all unbelievably pagan practices. When we forgo those things, we can inherit instead these wonderful days that he gave us, where we can follow out the very things our master did, like Passover. One of the things we like to do on Passover that I think is critical is to wash each other's feet. We try to imitate Passover the way that the Messiah did it, right? We like to break bread together with our family and we love to wash each other's feet. This is an opportunity of confession of sins, blessings over each other, right? It's one of the most beautiful times to be able to celebrate this. Passover is a very intimate feast. It's not like a big, gigantic, everybody come hang out kind of feast. That's like Sukkot is like that. It's just like an epic party, 7 days of camping and wild fun celebration. You're only supposed to rejoice. You take tithe for throughout the year, like you give tithe just for that, super unpopular teaching in most churches. But pray to Yah that it changes, that people would go out and celebrate his wonderful appointed times. He's got appointments for us. He loves us and he cares for us to do it. But Passover is this like somber event. It's a serious, like weighty moment because there's this destroyer that was going through, like an immortal sent by Yahuwah that just only destroyed. What a powerful, terrifying force of destruction right outside the door, right? That's Passover. Passover is a somber time where you're literally, we need the blood of the lamb to cover the doorposts of our heart in order to make it through. That's like the significance of Passover. It's so beautiful. So this is that moment. Understand that. And he came to Shimon Kifa and he said to him, Master, do you wish to wash my feet? And Yeshua answering and said to him, You do not know what I'm doing now, but you shall know after this. Kiva said to him, By no means shall you wash my feet ever. Yeshua answered him and said, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Shimon Kifa said to him, Master, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Yeshua said to him, He who has had a bath does not need to wash except his feet, but is clean altogether. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would deliver him up. So he said, You are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and sat down again, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and master, and you say, Well, for I am. Then if I, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is an emissary greater than he who sent him. If you do know these teachings, blessed are you if you do them. I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture might be filled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. Now I say to you before it takes place, that when it does take place, you shall believe that I am. Now I say to you, truly, truly, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. When Yeshua has said this, he was troubled in spirit and witnessed and said, Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you shall deliver me up. The taught ones looked at one another, doubting of whom he spoke. And one of his taught ones, whom Yeshua loved, was reclining on the bosom of Yeshua. Shimon Kiva then motioned him to ask him, who was it of whom he spoke? And leaning back on the breast of Yeshua, he said, Master, who is it? Yeshua answered and said, It is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I've dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Yehuda from Kiriath, son of Shimon. And after the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Yeshua therefore said to him, What you do quickly. But no one at the table knew why he had said this to him. For some were supposing, because Yehuda had the bag, or the wallet, that Yeshua was saying to him, Buy what we need for the festival, or that he should give somewhat to the poor. So having received the bread, he then went out straightway, and it was night. What a moment. Why, in the course of that feast, right, in the course of them sitting there together and breaking bread together and him washing their feet, he's serving them. Understand, he washed Judas's feet before he betrayed him. He washed his feet knowing that the next time this man put his sandals on his feet, he would be putting on onto his feet something that it says Yahuwah hates, which is feet that are quick to shed innocent blood. Yahuwah says he hates that. He hates that. So here's a man about to do something that is absolute evil, and yet he still took off his robes of righteousness, his authority, his commanding presence, and girded himself as a servant, girded himself as the lowest person in the house. And he took it upon himself to honor that man and to bless that man. That is fire on the heads of your enemy. When we imitate our Messiah in how we don't revile for reviling's sake, we don't return reviling for reviling. When we instead bless our enemies, when we do good to them who harm us, like he talks about in the story in the Kings, man, there's these battles at times that are fought purely through supernatural means. Okay, they don't get enough press coverage in our life because they deny, they make people uncomfortable. They're like, it's just, can you just talk about normal kind of stuff? But like, there's these incredible times where a prophet of Yahuwah was protected so powerfully and supernaturally. Like these guys are trying to plan an assault. Man, I should just go there. Hold on. Second Kings. Like I tell you guys all the time, I love the book of Kings. First and Second Kings. It's so good. Hold on. Let me just hit that point on the devil first, real quick, because I want to talk about supernatural deliverances. I want to talk about that. But I don't want to miss this point. The devil is Yeshua got troubled in his spirit from that moment when he was serving everyone, and he took off his authority and he handed it off and he washed the feet of his disciples. Like when he did that, he was the leader of leaders in the room. It was undeniable. Everybody knew he was the leader. That's how leaders, true leaders, are able to influence large groups of people. They serve them effectively. Understand, like, this is why leadership in the scriptures was broken up into specific number sets and groupings. Like when Moses is in the wilderness trying to figure out how to manage all of these people, millions of people, his father-in-law comes in and gives him wisdom and counsel on how to manage it so he's not burned out all the time. It's so easy to get burned out in ministry. You guys can, if you're not into this field at all, you can't even hardly imagine sometimes the burdens that come upon you and from the people that come to you. It's an incredible thing. But when you're face first in front of people, like when we've done some big feast days, there can be a nonstop demand for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it destroys you. It can burn you out like you wouldn't believe. And there's certain people that are genuinely sent by the enemy to just deplete you of all your resources. So it's another thing entirely. But he told him to divide it according to leadership, right? It was like a decalogue system, a system of tens, maybe a decimal system. He broke it down. He's like, listen, you should have leaders of tens and leaders of 50s and leaders of hundreds, leaders of thousands, right? This was a way of being able to deliver information out effectively, but not to be burdened by stuff that really shouldn't be on your plate. Like a squad leader, like in the military, you get like 10 guys. That's a squad leader, more or less. If you got 50 guys, you're like a platoon leader. Then you got a company. Then you got like command. Like they break it down for this for a reason so that you're not bogged down all the time. Yeshua is imparting to his disciples his last teachable moments right now, face to face, and he's showing them how to take off his robe of authority. He's he's taking his sphere of authority that is supreme over all the earth, and he's literally debasing himself to the form of a slave. Like this is the lowest position in the entire room, the lowest position in the house, the kingdom to go to. And this is what he does with his last like witness to his disciples. Like this is stuff for us to imitate because in that room, after he gets done and puts his robe back on, who enters into the room? The devil, the dragon literally enters into the room. No one else detects him but Yeshua. It said his spirit was troubled, right? That's him detecting, that's him having spiritual eyes to see something that everybody else is blind to around them. This is knowing how to identify spiritual threats. This is over the horizon radar station that should be active in our lives. But this comes through an intimate relationship with our Father and a discernment. It's called the discerning of spirits. It's one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, set apart spirit is having the ability to discern the spirits. And Yeshua was able to discern that. And you can see how it changed his perspective. It changed his wording. He was now engaging not just the guys that are sitting there in front of them, but he's engaging the dragon in this showdown. He's engaging him directly. And he's also walking them all through prophecy because right now they're blind to it. Right now they can't see what's going to come. But in a moment, they're going to suddenly see and realize later on, this is what he was talking about. This is what he meant. And you know what? He feeds bread to the very person, the dragon himself. He breaks bread with him. And understand it was that root of rot. That's the one that he knew the devil had his place in him. He had his grounds in him and he had the stronghold in him. Even though he did that, he still trusted the Father's plan of action and he knew that that was it. And so this is the moment where that predator strikes. This is the moment the predator thinks that he is about to get everything he's ever asked for and hoped for. He's about to strike a deadly blow. And you know what? He is. I want to show you guys, though, a supernatural showdown moment in Second Kings. It's one of my favorite stories. And it's a way of how we can deal with our enemies sometimes in such a manner so as to prepare and protect children generations to come. You know, the all these guys are wanting to kill Elisha because, dude, Elisha's a stud. Hold on a second. Let me go there. You want to see just a super tiny, awesome, wonderful, splendid miracle? My family had one yesterday. This is cool. I'm just going to put this out here because it made me think of this, the tiny little things that just impact your children's faith drastically. My wife has an absolute deep love for birds. She loves them tremendously, more than most people can even start to understand. She just loves birds. She's a bird lady. She likes them. We raised turkeys in our RV for a reason. We had baby quail. It was crazy, wild, wonderful adventure. But we've got bird feeders outside right now, and they are prolifically full of all kinds of little birds and sparrows and yellow finches, golden finches, and all kinds of little birds. And they love them so much. They love watching them. And she has this window that's over the kitchen, and she can see out and see her little birds feeding there, and she just loves that. Well, yesterday the girls were over there. They're reading through the scriptures in the morning. They're doing like 3 chapters together. The girls are just cruising through the scriptures right now. She's trying to read through the entirety of the scriptures with the girls. And they hear this crash into the window and they're like, oh, a bird. The birds fly into the windows and sometimes they smash their faces. So Chelsea runs out there and this bird, it's not the first bird strike we've had. We probably had 5 or 6 of them. This thing is down on the ground. And normally when they're down, they're just kind of stunned. They're just kind of stunned. And then they're kind of, you can hold them for a little bit, but they're kind of like moving around and they're just kind of freaked out and stuff like that. And the girls get a hold of them. They always love it. Well, this time the bird's like neck was completely bent backwards and his legs were all curled up and his wings were flailed, like done. And she was like, oh no, he broke his neck. And so she like scoops him up and is just like holding him and praying for him, and she comes inside and the girls, I hear all kinds of commotion out there and they're like, come in here. And they're like, broke his neck. And they're all real sad, right? They're real sad. Jubilee in particular is very sad. And so they're like holding this bird. And I mean, it's just like, and you're like, oh, that's not good. That's not good at all. But Jubilee, we look at her and we're like, Jubilee,
You should pray for the bird. You should pray for him. And Jubilee just is like sitting there touching this little bird. She prays and she's just like, Yeshua, will you please make this bird live and fix its neck so it's not broken and so he can fly again? Will you please heal this bird? And it's sitting there completely motionless. It's motionless for maybe another 5-10 seconds. And then Chelsea just tries to flip it over to move its legs. And all of a sudden the bird just boom, like completely feet move, come back to erect. It sits up in her hand and is just holding there like normal. It was unbelievable. And they're all like watching it, like, oh, he's healed it. He's healed it. She's so excited. Like you can see their eyes just like open. And there's this like realization of like wonderful help has come. Like an outside agent has helped to heal this bird. And so they go outside and there's this window out here where I can see. And all of a sudden, Chelsea's holding the bird like this, right? And as she steps out these steps, the bird takes off and flies away. And Chelsea just lifts up her hands and she's just like, praise you, Yahuwah. And then she's just crying because she's like, I just saw a miracle. Like this bird whose neck was broken and was like dead in my hands has come back to life and is flying again. And we both felt like it was Jubilee's little prayers, this tiny, simple little prayer in faith that healed this bird. Like she got to witness that. Like now my daughter has a testimony on her faith that adds witness to it, that adds to Naomi's of faith, my wife's faith, that like our Father still answers us for these small miracles. To us, they're very meaningful, but to others, they might just be like a little blip in the story. 2 Kings 6 here has one of those just dropped into there's a massive, crazy, unbelievable miracle that takes place in here that affects hundreds of thousands of people, the destiny and the lives of generations of people. But then there's this other super tiny one that's just a few verses that affects one guy, okay? That affects one man. That's it. Check this out. This is 2 Kings 6. And the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, see, the place where we dwell with you is too small for us. Please, let us go to the Yarden, and let every man take a log from there, and let us make there a place to dwell. And he said, go. Then one said, please, undertake to go with your servants. And he answered, I shall go. And as he went with them, they came to the Yarden, and they cut down trees. And it came to be as one was cutting down a tree, that the iron axe head fell into the water. And he cried out and said, oh, my master, for it was borrowed. And the man of Elohim said, where did it fall? And he showed him the place. And he cut off a stick and threw it in there and made the iron float. And he said, pick it up. And he reached out his hand and took it. That's it. That's it. That's the end of that story. I mean, just it's one of these just beautiful moments because he's like, he actually cares for this guy enough to have a miracle take place in his life. Understand an iron axe head. I found this stone axe head down in a river, buried in the muck, that had been there very likely for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Okay. This thing was made by hand and is something that could be reproduced by hand. If you had access to this stone and you had a lot of time, you could make this axe head, right? An iron axe head, however, was incredibly hard to reproduce and was extremely costly, completely other level. These, much more common. Do you know how rare it is to find iron axe heads from similar time periods? This was something he borrowed. And according to the Torah, according to the scriptures, if you borrow someone's tool, if I'm like borrow somebody's knife, okay? If I give somebody out a knife library, you guys that are knife guys, create the knife library. It's so fun. You should trade and exchange knives with your buddies and with other people. Create the knife library. Check in a knife, check out a knife. You can get to know different knives, right? If I borrowed this knife from somebody else, in the Torah, it says if I damage that tool or if I lose that tool, I'm responsible to replace it, right? This is very, very helpful as like a principle in life. I adhere to this always because it's a way of like reimbursing somebody for something that you did. Now, if you're a laborer, if you're somebody who's an employee and you break a tool that's your boss's, you don't have to replace that. It's like, he's your hireling. This is what you get, right? But this is the principle that guy knew. He's going to have to replace that iron axe head. And it doesn't sound like this guy is rolling in the doski. You know what I'm saying? He's trying to build a house out of logs personally, which means like the bro's got some skill sets and he's like of the children of the prophets, which means he eats out of the generosity of others. It's not the same type of guy that can replace an iron axe head easily. This is like very, very expensive. So even here in this tiny little moment, we just see the love of the Father in an intimate and powerful way. I opened my book
I opened my book with a story about praying for a miracle like this to take place when I lost my wedding ring in the ocean on my honeymoon. And I was like, no. And I was praying this verse that it would float, that I would find it. I was out in like 20 feet of water trying to dive down and find this wedding ring while my wife was on the beach. Like I'm like brand newlywed. And this tungsten wedding ring is just sunk into the sand. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's the ocean, man. It's because I put on stupid sunscreen. Dadgummit. I was totally beguiled by the serpent at that time in that way. Dang it. Sunscreen's from the devil. I'm telling you, folks, dig into it. Wear long, modest clothing. Wear linen. You don't need that. Just wear clothes. Shocking. If you go look at the sun too early in the morning, it'll help to create those incredible melanin production in your skin cells so they know what to produce. But if you wear sunglasses, you're killing yourself. You're just literally killing yourself just a little tiny bit, blocking all the wonderful, just beautiful rays of the sun that were supposed to be on your eyes. Something to consider. Wear hats. Anyways, I was diving down over and over and over again looking for this wedding ring, praying that the Father would bring it back. And I started praying, just please make it float. You made that iron axe head float. You made that iron axe head float. I believe you can make my wedding ring float on the sand. Please, 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 please. And I totally dove down, you guys, and it was sitting on the top of the sand. I kid you not. Tungsten sitting on the top of the sand. The opposite of everything. It's the exact same density as gold. It's just incredibly heavy and dense. Should have stepped into the should have sunk into the depths, But hallelujah, he answered my little prayer there on that honeymoon. I start my book about that because those little miracles are like, they're lasting. They impart to us a gift of faith. Now let's read about a super powerful epic other one. And the sovereign of Aram, bad guys, was fighting in Israel and took counsel against his servant, saying, my camp is in such and such a place. And the man of Elohim sent to the sovereign of Israel, saying, be on guard. Do not pass this place, for the Armenians are coming down there. The sovereign of Israel then sent to the place of which the man of Elohim had spoken to him and warned him, so that he was on his guard there, not once and not twice. So he's a spy. That's basically what's happening here. Guys, if you want good spies in your network, you want children of Elohim. You want sons and daughters of righteousness, because Yahuwah can give them what's called words of knowledge, so they can know exactly where your enemies are. Like if you want those guys in your intelligence assets, they're very, very powerful people. They can tell you where your enemies are and where they're going to be and where they think they're going to go. It's really cool. But this ticks off the enemy. They're like, no. This greatly troubled the heart of the sovereign of Aram. And he called his servants and said, declare to me, who of us is for the sovereign of Yisrael? He's saying, who of us is a spy? You find the spy. I want to know where the mole is, and I want you to kill him. And one of his servants said, none, my master. O sovereign, for Elisha, the prophet who is in Yisrael, declares to the sovereign of Yisrael the words that you speak in your bedroom. And he said, go and see where he is, so that I send and get him. And it was reported to him, saying, see, he is in Dothan. And he sent horses and chariots and a great army there, and they came by night and surrounded the city. So now he's sending out Department of Homeland Security to get this guy. They're going to go bag him and tag him and lock him away under the Patriot Act, indefinite prosecution of him. They're like, no trial, no lawyers, nobody. You're going straight to Gitmo, son. And the servant of the man of Elohim rose early in the morning, early, and went out and saw an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servants said to him, oh, my master, what do we do? And he answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Memorize that one forever, you guys. These are like movie lines. You see what I'm saying? The Bible's so much more fun than the movies because it's real. It's like an actual story. These are like verbatim accounts that are taken from these people, written down, preserved for us to this time so we can regard them and understand that's a man of faith. That's a man of boldness and courage because he has the spiritual eyes to see. Yes, I know you're seeing the enemy, right? But understand, I am seeing our advocates. I am seeing the alliance that is with us. Like he has eyes to see something that most of us don't, because he's also gifted at being able to see into the spiritual realm. Check this out. And Elisha prayed and said, Yahuwah, I pray, open his eyes and let him see. And Yahuwah opened the eyes of the young man, and he looked and saw the mountain covered with horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. These are something that's called the Ophanim. Okay. There's this class of spiritual beings that we read about in the scriptures called Ophanim. They are like chariots within chariots, wheels within wheels, fiery chariots. They are celestial beings. They're an entity, an immortal that is literally like a transportation vehicle. They're incredibly fiery, powerful movement machines. They're sweet, man. And they came down to him. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed to Yahuwah and said, "Strike this nation with blindness, I pray." And he struck them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. And Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, nor is this the city. Follow me, and let me bring you to the man whom you seek." But he led them to Shamaron, Samaria. So see how sneaky this is? This is sweet warfare, dude. The guy is like literally seeing in the spiritual realm all the incredible heavenly host that's surrounding him as a guard. It's like a hedge of protection. It's like a wall of fire that surrounds Elisha. They're all like, dude, later on, another king tries to send some guys after him to like wrangle him up. A team of 50. He sends like a platoon of guys to go after him. He's like, they're all like, "Man of Elohim, come down here." And he's like, "If I am not a man of Elohim, then let fire come down from heaven and consume you." He's all like, just torches these guys to dust and ashes. Just fiery pillar, like Sinai style. Awesome, glorious, terrifying moment for everybody around him. They're dead. And then the king's like, "What the heck happened to those guys?" They're all like, I don't know. So he sends another squad, another platoon, right? He's kills them. Fire comes out of heaven. Same thing. Rinse and repeat. Dude's going to die. Next guy comes up, next commander. He's like, "I'm a captain. Um, please, man of Elohim, be merciful with us." Like he's humble. And so he lives. And he's like, "All right, I'll go with you. Sure. Okay. No fiery death for you," right? This is why when the disciples, like in later on in the scriptures, around Samaria too, surrounding this point, these people are like totally rejecting and mocking at Yeshua after this, and they're like not being welcoming and hospitable to him. They're like, "We should call fire down on these guys and consume them." And Yeshua's like, hey, take it easy. Put your sword back into your sheath, boys. Not yet. Not yet. He's like, he shows meekness and restraint there, right? That's because they know these stories. They know these stories is real. Like they're like, you know, this is one of the abilities that we have. We can call fire down on heaven to consume these people. This is sweet, man. This is the fun stuff that comes to life when you start to read the scriptures like ferociously. Check this out. So now he leads them. They think they're like this random guy is leading the whole army to Elisha. And they're like totally ignorant of the fact that it is Elisha. And he's leading them to Samaria, which is the capital. He's like, "No, we're going to take you to the capital so you guys can see your enemies face to face." Check this out. And it came to be when they came to Shamaron, that's Samaria, that Elisha said, "Yahuwah, open the eyes of these men so that they see." And Yahuwah opened their eyes, and they looked, and they saw they were in the midst of Shamaron. And when the sovereign of Yisrael saw them, he said to Elisha, "My father, should I strike? Should I strike?" He's like, "Can I kill him? Can I kill him?" And he's like, "Do not strike. Do you strike those whom you have taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set food and water before them, and let them eat and drink and go to their master." And he made a great feast for them. And after they ate and drank, he let them go, and they went to their master. And the bands of Armene raiders came no more into the land of Yisrael. Isn't that just wild? He's like, "No, don't go kill them. Make a feast for them instead. Make a feast for them." And you know what he did? Instead of killing a bunch of clearly un on people that are not able to defend themselves, instead of just eradicating them all right then, because he probably wouldn't have been able to kill them all to the man. Like when you really want to kill every single person in an entire army, it's incredibly difficult to do simultaneously. This is why modern militaries have come up with certain types of munitions just to try to be able to kill a huge amount of them in a highly concentrated area. Like when you know your troops are being, your enemy is staging their troops before they go to deploy them. Like that's one of those rare opportunities to destroy a huge mass of them. But when you're in battle, when you're in warfare, you never try to consolidate all of your troops in one concentrated area. But these dudes were blind. So understand something. How do blind people lead each other around? You're like literally holding your buddy. These people are all grouped together in a tight mass, ideal to be able to butcher them effectively, surround them all. And then you just slowly, incrementally hack your way through every single person. Unbelievable, terrifying stuff that happened in the battles that used to happen with enemies marching and against each other. Like we have accounts of guys who are in the middle of squares of soldiers. So like there was something called a phalanx, which is where soldiers used to line up with rows of like 10 or 12. And they used to have, this is like a Greek fighting style. They used to have these incredibly long spears, like 10, 14 foot long spears. And they had these spears in, they would hold them up as they're like marching around, right? But when they would bring these things down, it would create almost like a porcupine armadillo like ball of nightmares, like ranks deep. Okay. And so the front line was the ones who was like advancing into that mass, right? Well, what could happen is it's very vulnerable for that. I mean, face to face, there's nothing that really beats that. I don't care if it's horses or whatever. But if you can flank that enemy, come in from their sides, right, in like a pincer attack and come in on their sides, or you can come in behind them, right? If you can do that, that mass of people is incredibly vulnerable from their sides, right? And so this is why the formations, it was very, very important never to let yourself get flanked. But if they did, what would happen is that they surrounded them from those sides. They could compress in on them and they literally can't get away. You cannot run away. If you're like in the center, you literally just had to sit there. You could not move. There'd be a mass of men squished upon you so forcefully that you cannot get out. And men would be so terrified, they would like bury their heads in the sand to try to suffocate before this death came onto them. I mean, just terrifying stuff. Things that might take 6 or 8 hours to kill everybody to get to root them out all the way. But inevitably, what do you create if you kill an army of 80,000 people? You're going to create a bunch of orphans, a bunch of widows, and another generation of people that are going to want vengeance. They're going to want revenge. They're going to want retribution. They're going to want to come and punish you for what you did to their dad, right? My brother, my uncle, that stuff creates generational wounds that people want to repay. And instead, by blessing them when they clearly could have conquered them, they neutralized their enemy for many generations. That's an incredible story, and one we must never forget, the power of giving a feast in the presence of our enemies. You know, it said when a man's ways are pleasing before Yahuwah, he makes their enemies to be at peace with them. Elisha and the king of Israel were pleasing before Yahuwah for how they handled that situation. That's just one of those stories, you guys. That should always be back in the mind in case you ever get an opportunity to smite an entire army overnight. You may need to. Just saying. You may not. But there's an opportunity to do that. I want to jump into the Sharith imperative here for a second because we're talking about those authorities and those mighty principalities and those governing forces. And he has in here, you guys, a section on Ephesians chapter 6. Let's go there. Let's go there for a second. I'm sure many of us are well versed in understanding the principalities. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, authority, and spiritual wickedness in high places. We've heard this kind of stuff. It's like the hierarchy of the enemy. Talked about it a bit. But I wanted to read to you. He has a breakdown on the armor in a way that I don't know if I've ever heard it quite like this. And I just wanted to hit it because it's awesome. He's going to go in and identify a lot of these characters that we are wrestling with and how we ourselves can deal with it. This is on page 308. Placing Ephesians 6 back into its biblical context, the epistle to the Christians in Ephesus is one of the most densely packed theological writings in the New Testament. Paul invested 3 years of his ministry winning souls and training up the new believers in the faith. I believe this is the reason the apostle could unfold so much theological meat into this small epistle. I have several Bibles in which I've studied or preached out of Ephesians so many times that I can lift that epistle out of my Bible and wave it to you. Ephesians is not a book to study lightly. It contains virtual gold mines of biblical truth. In this apostle, Paul is continually contrasting two realities: who they were without Elohim and hope, and who they became through Christ. Now, Paul begins laying the foundations for enabling these believers to put on the armor of God in chapter 4. But you have not learned so in Christ. If so be you that you heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Yeshua, that you put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt, according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, that you put on the new man, which after Elohim is created in righteousness and true holiness. Therefore, put away lying. Speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place for the devil. Let him that steals steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needs. Man, do you notice this? Another connections to giving room to the devil in regards to lying and stealing, right? When you go back into John, it talks about like the thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy, or in the book of Luke too, that he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Like Yeshua says, I'm the good shepherd. The sheep hear my voice. They know my voice. But there's another one who comes in like a thief and a robber. That's what he comes to do. And that's literally what the adversary came to do that very night. But that's because in Judas was already such a well familiar home and environment for the devil. He prepared a room for the devil in his heart. And that was through that need for that thieving. This is one of the most important memory verses, by the way. You can ever get this next one. Let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but only that which is good to the edifying of those that hear it, that it may minister grace or favor unto the hearers. Grieve not the Holy Spirit of Elohim, whereby you are sealed unto the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be kind to one another, tender hearted, forgiving one another, even as Elohim, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. Ephesians 4:20-32. Paul is reminding the believers of the mystery of godliness within their lives. They must put off the old man before they can put on the new man in Christ. What a powerful truth of displacement in spiritual warfare. You must drive out the mystery of iniquity in your life and establish the mystery of godliness in its place. The only way that a believer can do this is through the renewing of the mind. As the believer learns to live a life that will not grieve the Holy Spirit through continued sin, he is learning how to lend his body as an instrument of righteousness in the earth. The apostle also builds a long list of sins that must be abandoned by the believer. All such behavior in word or deed must be cast aside so that we can put on Christ. Here's a paradox of the armor listed in Ephesians chapter 6. This was Almighty God's armor. Therefore, his armor can only be placed where the character of Christ has been established. We cannot put on the armor of God through saying a little prayer based on Ephesians 6:14-18 alone. When we live a life in accordance with what Paul was revealed in chapters 1-5, the armor becomes established in our lives. This is one of the reasons Mary and I have received emails and phone calls from all over the world from Christians who have been so wounded on the battlefield. We assume that we've been clad in the armor of God, only to discover that we've entered into the field of battle in our BVDs. It's like your battle dress uniform. The resulting havoc has sidelined countless believers in the arena of warfare. The spiritual drift created in our theologies over the last centuries have created entire generations of believers that more resemble the fairy tale of the emperor's new clothes. The army only exists in their imaginations. Finally, my brethren, be strong in Yahuwah and in the power of his might. Oh, yeah, we're going to jump into, we've hit this one earlier on page 311, where he goes through the being strong in the enemy. Okay, we're going to jump into put on then, therefore. This is on page 312. We're going to jump to page 312 real quick. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles, the schemes, like we've talked about, the amusements. We hit this one. If you guys haven't watched the episode called The Devices of the Devil, the schemes here, the wiles of the devil that we're talking about is also the amusements, the mesmerizations, the entertainment, the devices of the devil. Remember this. Apostle of the Gentiles has already stressed the need to put off the old man. To attempt to enter this battle while remaining in the old man would be foolhardy. Now you're beginning to understand and realize the state of spiritual warfare in the 21st century. Putting on our armor is putting on Messiah. Yeshua, is the perfect example of biblical holiness. When the mystery of godliness displaces the mystery of iniquity within, the believer will discover that he's armed to the teeth to wage war against the trifecta of hell. For we wrestle not, the roster of the enemy. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. In the letter to the Ephesians, as the part of the Pillar New Testament commentary, Peter O'Brien shares why the armor of God is so necessary. Paul explains further why believers need God's mighty armor if they are going to stand firm. If It is because the battle being waged is not against human foes, but against evil spiritual powers of great authority. The supernatural, powerful, and cutting nature of the opposition makes the use of God's armor absolutely necessary. We must never lose sight of the fact that humanity is not our real adversary. Our true enemy is immortals, who were once a part of God's divine council. These beings of hyperspace joined forces with Lucifer around the time of the Tower of Babel. Now let's examine Paul's descriptions of these immortals. First, principalities. The Greek word is used is arche. Thayer's Greek English lexicon for the New Testament describes arche as meaning beginning, origin, used absolutely, or the beginning of all things. Therefore, principalities are the most ancient and possibly the most powerful of the immortals. The Theological Dictionary of the New Testament also adds, signifies primacy, whether in time, beginning, principum, or in rank, power, dominion, or office. These principalities are not to be trifled with. We will find no instructions within the Word of God on how to ascend into the second heaven to wage war directly with these beings of ancient power. In our modern songs and theologies, we describe going up to the high places to wage warfare. Such expression of this conflict is a misinterpretation of the instruction within the Word of God in the Old Testament. In ancient times as well as today's, the mystery religions would establish altars to the gods on the tops of the mountains and other high places. Israel was instructed to overturn these altars within the boundaries of Israel. Similarly, we are wrestling with the influence of these denizens from hyperspace within the first heaven. It is a tactical error to move outside of the sphere of authority that we have been given in the Word of God. Our authority is established here in the first heaven. If an ancient one violates our sphere of authority, we can bind up that influence and begin proclaiming God's truth. Any attempt to ascend into the second heaven to directly combat any of the immortals that Paul refers to in Ephesians chapter 6 is fraught with peril. It's like walking up to a sleeping grizzly bear and poking it with a sharp stick. This first act brings our presence to the attention of the angry bear. We soon realize that we have no weapons to defend ourselves in the arena of the second heaven. Too many lives have been destroyed or even lost through such unscriptural combat tactics. We are to seek the throne of Elohim for assistance. Warring immortals can be commissioned from the third heaven to wage combat on our behalf. The story of Daniel and the dark immortal over Persia is a good example of this dynamic. Daniel's persistence in prayer and fasting empowered Elohim's messenger in the war that was raging in the second heaven. It's the same today. Our continued intercession and fasting will continue to move the third heaven to rally our cause. As the influence of these agents of darkness are pushed back by God's angelic army, we can then labor to bring the gospel to humanity and free them from the kingdom of darkness. As the kingdom of Elohim begins to expand in an area, the influence of the enemy is decreased. As long as the kingdom of Elohim and the holiness available through Christ rule in the hearts of humanity in an area, these dark immortals have little power or influence. Man, that's a point I want to hit on. I say this somewhat regularly when talking about spiritual warfare and trying to caution people about engaging with principalities or powers or rulers, engaging with some of these more powerful territorial spirits. I say be very, very, very careful. And there's a lot of teachers out there. Please understand something. There's some folks in the spiritual warfare community who are off the rails, totally outside of their sphere of authority, talking about people commanding angel armies, going into the second heaven, going into the heavenlies, and battling these armies and tearing down their powers, destroying their armies, building up new ones, like people who are engaged in a very supernatural form of spiritual warfare where they are basically going into the astral plane themselves through their spirit man and waging these wars and having these battles. And I'm telling you guys, it is one of the most dangerous things you can ever get into in your life. It is so, so dangerous and so wrought. Like Michael Lake said it real nicely. It's wrought with peril. That's a very King James Version way of saying it's a stinking slaughter fest if you step into that place. It is a terrible idea to go running into the minefield without a minesweeper going ahead of you and clearing the way. Do you understand? People that jump into this stuff, their lives get ruined.
they get ruined because you know what? You're dealing with immortals of insurmountable power compared to us. We have the authority of the Messiah to deal with them in accordance with his word. But you will never find in the word people going into the astral plane and projecting their spirit man and their consciousness to go have these battles and these wars. It doesn't happen. There are times when Yahuwah supernaturally reached down and grabbed somebody through the spirit realm like Ezekiel, and he took him like by the hair of the silver thread, and lifted him up and took him to Jerusalem and took him to the temple and showed him the abominations of what people were doing in there, worshiping Tammuz, weeping for Tammuz, right? Like all the people observing Lent right now, the disgusting paganism of invoking these black death over their foreheads. This is stuff that they were doing in the temple back then that he literally supernaturally opened Ezekiel's eyes to see it when others couldn't see it, right? This is something that Yahuwah can do according to his will and his desire. It should never be something we, through spiritual practices and disciplines, try to train ourselves up to go and do. This is why going into the astral projection realm is so dangerous, because you leave a spiritual void in your body. You leave your body empty, and you know what? Nature abhors a vacuum. It hates a vacuum. So it's going to spiritually fill that thing up. This is what happens. You start talking to people. Like I get people that are trying to get deliverance from astral projection and being demonized because of it. People that had their bodies being torn apart, them having a struggle to even get back into their bodies because there was other stuff that filled it up. All the torment and the anguish that can come from that. This is practices that come from that strange fire. That's people that are eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is people that are caught up in angelology and are totally off the rails. And you know what? It sucks. It's super lame. But you know what? It happens. And unfortunately, there's some very popular people that are out there that are all about it. And I can't tell you, run far away from people that are doing that stuff. Run very, very far, because their house is going to come down with a great crash. You don't want to be anywhere near that thing. They're building their house on sinking sand, y'all. Oh, by no means in saying any of that am I trying to diminish your understanding of the authority that Yahuwah has given you here on this earth as his ambassadors through the blood of the Messiah and the armor that we have. But you must understand, we are not to revile these entities, these immortals. Like, we're never to revile the Elohim. Like it says in Deuteronomy, don't curse a ruler nor revile the Elohim. Like, don't go cursing them. You know what I'm saying? You don't go mocking them. You don't go belittling them. You don't, man, people sitting there trampling on the devil and mocking about it. I trample on you. I curse you. All these things that they'll say in humor almost. It's super dangerous. I'll tell you what, you guys, we if we do not respect our enemy, we will be devoured by them. And one of the least things we could ever do in our life, one of the most important things we can ever do in our life, is to understand the hierarchy that is who we are battling with. Okay. He's going to go through some of the other classes of beings that we deal with here. Please understand, it's better to have a reverence and a respect for your enemy than it is to ever underestimate him. Okay. Please understand this. He who can be given the mind of the Messiah to be able to perceive and understand and deal with and contend with these things. But most of the time, they will run circles around you beyond your wildest imagination. But if we have a clean house, we can rely on the Holy Spirit working through us to give us wisdom that's from above and that's not earthly and carnal and sensual, so that we can contend with these enemies and we can have supernatural insight in how to dismantle their empires. Okay. But what you talked about there, in living a life of holiness and set apartness, bringing people back to a living a life according to the Bible, a biblicity, where people actually hunger and thirst for righteousness. This is what strips the power source behind the scenes for these immortals and allows there to be a change in the heavenlies, allows there to be changes in the hierarchy of who's ruling and governing over a territory at any given time. But if you don't also identify the core root of that, if you don't deal with the heart issues, if you still have major doors open in your life, it makes you very susceptible to being taken in and destroyed. Let's carry on here to page 315. Powers. The Greek word used is exousia. The Greek English lexicon of the New Testament and other Christian literature describes this word as meaning potential or resource to command, control, govern, capability, might, and power. Powers can be described like the generals of the principalities to exercise control over humanity and govern the nations, the rulers of darkness. The Greek word used is cosmocrator. Again, BDAG defines this word meaning world ruler. The Logos Bible Sense Lexicon adds this definition: world influence.
Any influential governing authority over the inhabited world understood in terms of physical control, including both human and preternatural authorities. Therefore, these rulers are quite possibly the officers that serve under the generals. Oh, man. This is my favorite stuff here. Because then I can go to the carnal stuff, right? Then I can go to like the worldly stuff to examine it. Do you get what I'm saying here? Like, so when I read the breakdown in Ephesians 6, like I get invited to do shows with people and they want to get into politics conversations with me. They're like, they really want to get me to dial in on like my perspective on Trump and Biden. And they really want me to go down that road. There's a lot of people that are like, come on, just talk about it more. I can't I can't look at the headlines without seeing spiritual wickedness, agents of evil. That's why I call them these things, because we have commanders, we have generals. If you're totally bereft of understanding, a general is a general who like drives onto a military base is the guy who like commands the base. Understand this. Like he's the guy who's in charge of everything that takes place there. He's responsible. When someone who's higher of authority than him wants to find out what's the state of affairs going on in that base, like Fort Carson, Colorado, where I was stationed, when that general was on the base, okay, if a higher general, you have 1-star generals, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, and very rarely a 5-star general. Dwight D. Eisenhower is like the only 5-star general, commander of Allied forces of the Pacific and the Atlantic. It's just crazy. There's a guy, Bohemian Grove brother, you know, the agents of evil, guy bowing down to Moloch at human sacrifice. That guy, right? That's why I can never not see the fact that I'm not just dealing with the dude. I'm dealing with the embodiment. That man is the embodiment of a spiritual wickedness on this earth. He's his human agent. He's his human ambassador. That's the ambassador for Moloch. Does that make sense? Like when I see these people, I'm trying to discern who's the spiritual power behind that one, because that's the kingdom I'm really dealing with. That's the actual bad guy I'm thinking about engaging in. Does that make sense? I can't not see these people as anything other than pawns on the chessboard. Okay? Does that, like, these people are continually bowing down to a different mighty one, a different immortal. They're like, yeah, they're still bowing down and kissing the Pope's ring, right? That's the sovereign potentate of the earth, religiously, politically, economically. That's what the Pope is. When you talk about who are the most powerful people, if somebody's not also addressing the Pope and allegiance to Vatican and the Rome, like if you're not addressing that, you're missing like 85% of the territorial power climate of the earth. They really are. If you like, you got to be able to understand why these dragon bloodlines and why the black nobility, why these things are able to so govern and influence our lives. We're going to jump in here to the underground history of American education, because we're going to look at some of those officers. The officers are like the people that the general has report to him. The general can pick up the phone and call the officers to find out the state of affairs at different places on his base, the people that he's in charge of. That's what I feel like so much of the people, when I read history books and try to find out who instituted mass schooling in the United States. What was the agency? The more powerful guys, like the spiritual wickedness, like we're dealing with, who's the cosmocrators, the rulers of darkness behind the United States American education system and what we've received today. Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of dive into here. This is on page 101. Let's go there, son. The Genetic Manifesto. Meanwhile, at the project's offices of an important employer of experts, the Rockefeller Foundation, friends were hearing from Max Mason, its president, that a comprehensive national program was underway. In Mason's words, the control of human behavior, end quote. This dazzling ambition was announced April 11th, 1933. Schooling figured prominently in the design. Rockefeller had been inspired by the work of Eastern European scientist Hermann Mueller to invest heavily in genetics. Mueller had used X rays to override genetic law, inducing mutations in fruit flies. This seemed to open the door to the scientific control of life itself. Mueller preached that planned breeding would bring mankind to paradise faster than God. His proposal received enthusiastic endorsement from the greatest scientists of the day, as well as powerful economic interests. So here is the exousia, right? Here's the para numenicae that's like operating behind the scenes, who is directing a man. Now here's how you establish the doctrine. What it takes then is the voice of experts, like in our society, the voice of experts endorsing an idea, and then financial backers to make sure that that comes to life. That's what's required. Like if we were ever to have actual effective counterforce to this, it would require endorsements and financing on a huge scale to like truly be really effective on a larger scale. Well, this is why if you have your agents of evil in positions of power already, they're able to very quickly endorse an idea and then make it absolutely mainstream like that. And this is what happens here. Mueller would win the Nobel Prize. Of course he would, because now we have, oh, see the Nobel Prize laureate. Now you guys obviously got to listen to what this guy has to say. Reduced his proposal to a 1,500 word called the Geneticist Manifesto, and watched with satisfaction as 22 distinguished American and British biologists of the day signed it. The state must prepare to consciously guide human sexual selection, said Mueller. School would have to separate worthwhile breeders from those slated for termination. Just a few months before this report was released, an executive director of the National Education Association announced that his organization expected to, quote, accomplish by education what dictators in Europe are seeking to do by compulsion and force, end quote. You can't get much clearer than that. World War II drove the project underground, but hardly retarded its momentum. Following a succession of global hostilities, school became a major domestic battleground for the scientific rationalization of social affairs through compulsory indoctrination. Great private corporate foundations led the way. So, one of the most powerful forces in our society that we contend with is these non-taxed organizations, these tax-free foundations, the charitable organizations. When we think of some of the more powerful financial people, they call themselves philanthropists who are giving to these charitable funds, these charitable foundations. These have agency to work inside our society to change society very quickly. That's how powerful, wealthy, elite rulers are able to govern society and economically and educationally. They use these tax-free foundations in order to do so much of that quickly. We'll carry on. Participatory democracy is put to the sword. 30 odd years later, between 1967 and 1974, teacher training in the United States was covertly revamped through coordinated efforts of a small number of private foundations, select universities, global corporations, think tank, and government agencies, all coordinated through the U.S. Office of Education and through key state education departments like those in California, Texas, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York. One of those most powerful, effective ways of indoctrinating children is through the textbooks, right? Texas and California, if a textbook designer or publishing company writes their textbooks, it's really to get those two markets. They're the biggest purchasers of the textbooks. So those two, just those two, New York also is on that list, are the major catalyst that brings change to all the textbooks in the United States. If they can get those textbooks out and sold, they're going to change it in almost all the other ones. Important milestones of the transformation were: one, an extensive government exercise in futurology called Designing Education for the Future. Number two, the Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project. And number three, Benjamin Bloom's multi volume Taxonomy on Educational Objectives, an enormous manual of over 1,000 pages, which in time impacted every school in America. While other documents exist, these three are appropriate touchstones of the whole, serving to make clear the nature of the project underway. Take them one by one and savor each. Designing Education, produced by the Education Department, redefined the term education after the Prussian fashion as a means to achieve important economic and social goals of a national character. So this is the goal of education in our country, is a means to achieve important economic and social goals of a national character.
State education agencies would henceforth act as on site federal enforcers, ensuring the compliance of local schools within central directives. Each state education department was assigned the task of becoming a agent of change, quote, and advised to, quote, lose its independent identity as well as its authority, end quote, in order to, quote, form a partnership with the federal government. This is a hierarchical shift, right? My contention is behind the scenes spiritually, there is a change of principalities, powers, rulers, dominions. There's a change in the spiritual hierarchy that once governed the instruction and education systems of our country. And we began to see a takeover of the physical agents. Anytime the physical agents are moving on the board, it's because there's already been spiritual changes behind the scenes that enable them to do so. Like you can't sit down and prepare for whether or not you're going to be successful in a military campaign unless you've already counted the cost of your soldiers and of the enemy soldiers and known, do I physically have the ability to conquer that enemy? So spiritually, this is always what happens behind the scenes. And as I trace these things back, I will always begin to find at the core of the origin story of each one of these things. We're talking about the 1960s right here. The book goes back all the way into the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, dealing with the change in spiritual identification of humans, of mankind, and getting people away from a biblical understanding, a biblical lens, so a biblical hierarchy that was ruling over us, and getting them to adopt a pantheistic, of one that was devoid of Yahuwah's influence on our lives, one that was abstaining from any of that. And that came through a lot of the Catholic movement and a lot of the version of Calvinism, which was justified sinners, the doctrine of justified sinners, that there's certain numbers of people that are going to be saved no matter what they do. They will never lose their salvation. Then there's other people that are only going to be condemned. Therefore, those that are justified sinners in that category, they have the right to rule over those other people however they want and to keep them ignorant and dumb and stupid so that they cannot ever fight back against us. That same time, contemporaneous of that, was the introduction of a lot of Charles Darwin, who we've read before, was an occultist, somebody who's frequently visited seances and ritual mass where people were calling for dead spirits, engaging in necromancy. Okay, that guy brought forth the idea of evolution, right? The scientific form of evolution of the favored races. He was the one that gave people a scientific justification to engage in this type of social Darwinian evolutionary projects, that we can rule over people because clearly there's a ranking of races and we are the highest. The Irishman, by the way, was ranked the lowest of like 56 races according to Charles Darwin's like taxonomy of the human race. He's like, yeah, these stupid Irishmen. That's how he like treated them, as like the worst. That's why Irish people in the slave trade were traded at the worst, almost most debased level of any of them. Something to consider, you guys. There's always spiritual mechanisms taking place before you're getting to a place where we're looking at all the physical manifestations of it. I'm gonna jump ahead here a little bit here, you guys. Now, the school conversion was assisted powerfully by a curious phenomenon of the late to mid 1960s, a tremendous rise in school violence and general school chaos, which followed a policy declaration, which seemed to have occurred nationwide, that the disciplining of children must henceforth mimic the due process system of the courts. Teachers and administrators were suddenly stripped of any effective ability to keep order in schools, since the due process apparatus of necessity, a slow, deliberate matter, is completely inadequate to the continual outbreaks of childish mischief all schools experience. Now, without the time honored ad hoc armory of disciplinary tactics to fall back on, disorder spiraled out of control, passing from the realm of annoyance into more dangerous terrain entirely, as word surged through student bodies that teachers' hands were tied, and each outrageous event that reached the attention of the local press served as an advertisement for expert prescriptions. Who had ever seen kids behave this way? Time to surrender the community involvement to the management of experts. Time also for the emergency measures like the special education and Ritalin. During this entire period, lasting 5 to 7 years, outside agencies like the Ford Foundation exercised the right to supervise whether children's rights were being given due attention, fanning the flames hotter even then, long after trouble had become virtually unmanageable. The Behavioral Science Teacher Education Project, published at the peak of this violence, informed teacher training colleges that under circumstances, teachers had to be trained as therapists. They must translate prescriptions of social physiology and psychology into practical action in the classroom. As curriculum had been redefined, so teaching followed suit. Third in the series of new gospel texts was Bloom's taxonomy. In his own words, a tool to classify the ways individuals are to act, think, or feel as the result of a new unit of instruction. Using methods of behavioral psychology, children would learn proper thoughts, feelings, and actions and have their improper attitudes brought from home remediated. In all stages of the school experiment, testing was essential to localize the child's mental state on an official rating scale. Bloom's epic spawned important descendant forms: mastery learning, outcomes based education, and school to work government business collaboration. Each classified individuals for convergence for convenience of social managers and businesses. Each offered data useful in controlling the mind and movements of the young, mapping the next adult generation. But for what purpose? Why was this being done? Did you hear how it said there? Third in the series of new gospel texts was Bloom's taxonomy, a tool to classify the ways individuals are to act, think, or feel as the result of some unit of instruction. They adopted a new Bible. Do you understand this? They have to. They picked up a new Torah. They're like, we don't want the loving instructions from Yahuwah. We want the loving instructions from Bloom. It's the scientific taxonomy. They're going to treat people like animals, right? That's what behavioral psychology is all rooted in, is the idea that, oh yeah, people are like dogs. You can train them just like dogs. So do that. Train them like dogs. Use bells. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Go to the cafeteria. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Go back to your room. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Now you can go pee. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. That's all like behavior and operant conditioning stuff. This is like B.F. Skinner. They took this stuff that he used to train dogs to salivate. When you ring a bell, you give them a bowl of food. Ring the bell, give the dog a bowl of food. Ring the bell, give the dog a bowl of food. He's always salivating, right? You ring the bell, you don't give him the food, but he salivates anyways, right? He's like, oh, look at that. We can condition behavior. Well, then he took it to a far extreme, started torturing animals, right? And he's like, well, if we do this and cause fear and cause panic and distress, we can create these responses whether we add the stimulus or not, right? We can condition responses in people. They took all of that same thing and mapped it and put it directly into our schools. This is where it came from. This is why children are raised this way, to stay in their classrooms and to follow this bell, to interrupt themselves. Constant interruptions, constant distractions, constant changing of environment, catalyzing them, like feeding them poisons, right? One of the best, you watch a documentary that's called like Coke versus Pepsi, I think is what it's called. And it goes to their wars and like they're really not wars, right? There's a propaganda behind it. But one of the big scenes inside that documentary was them dealing with, how do we get Coke or Pepsi into the schools? Like, we want to be in there, obviously. Lots of customers, lots of ways to make money. That greediness for game. Judas is alive today. That same device of the devil, the Coke dispensing machine, right? The soda machine. Like, this has been so destructive to the lives of so many children. Just for example, okay, in your bloodstream at any given time, you should have about a teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream. Okay. It's like a sugar cube. Like, yay, sugar in your bloodstream. Then we send our children home. It's like we reward our children, and so much of our society's conditioned us that we should reward ourselves with poison every time we do something good. Like, you did good today at school. You did a good job at practice. You won the soccer game. Let's go out and poison ourselves. Let's go eat poison, right? This is literally what we do. We go out and eat poison from the store. We're like, let's buy cake. Let's go buy some sodas for everyone. Like, good job, you guys. Let's get some Gatorade or vitamin water, death water. Let's go get some of that stuff, right? A child is going to school now. And now that the companies worked their way in with their devices of the devils and their kickback programs and all the rest of it, they're like, okay, we want to dispense soda in this school so that a child now can buy soda at random, right? And they can drink 40 of these worth of sugar into their bloodstream. And they're like, wow, we have these hyperactive children. Well, if only there was a cure somewhere out there that we could go depend upon. And they're like, don't worry, the drug sorcerers have arrived. Have your Ritalin and your Adderall ready to go. Don't worry, we can give them the Ritalin patch so they don't even have to remember to take their drugs, right? This is the world we live in, you guys. It's absolutely diabolically evil, and it's by design. It was built this way for a reason. He hits on this a little bit later on here. They're designing a system to kill us off and to control us all the way to our demise along that way. Okay. Oh, can't you feel it in your bones? I have a little doubt that the fantastic, this is page 105. I have little doubt the fantastic wealth of American big business is psychologically and procedurally grounded in our form of schooling. The training field for these grotesque human qualities is the classroom. Schools train individuals to respond as a mass. Boys and girls are drilled in being bored, frightened, envious, emotionally needy, generally incomplete. A successful mass production economy requires such a clientele. A small business, small farm economy like that of the Amish requires individual competence, thoughtfulness, compassion, universal participation. Our own requires a managed mass of leveled, spiritless, anxious, familyless, friendless, godless, and obedient people who believe the difference between Cheers and Seinfeld is a subject worth arguing about. The extreme wealth of American big business is a direct result of the school having trained us in certain attitudes like a craving for novelty. That's what the bells are for. They don't ring so much as to say, now for something different. We'll continue on page 105. An enclosed movement for children. The secret of American schooling isn't that it doesn't teach the way children learn, and it isn't supposed to. School was engineered to serve a concealed command economy and a deliberately re stratified social order. It wasn't made for the benefit of children and families as those individuals and institutions would define their own needs. It wasn't made for the benefit of kids and families, as those individuals and institutions would define their own needs. School is the first impression children get of organized society. Like most first impression, it is a lasting one. Life, according to school, is dull and stupid. Only consumption promises relief. Coke, Big Macs, fashion jeans, that's where real meaning is found. That's what the classroom's lesson is, however indirectly delivered. The decisive dynamics which make forced schooling poisonous to healthy human development aren't hard to spot. Work in classrooms isn't significant work. It fails to satisfy real needs pressing on the individual. It doesn't answer real questions experiences raise in the young mind. It doesn't contribute to solving any problem encountered in actual life. The net effect of making all schoolwork external to the individual longings, experience, questions, and problems is to render the victim listless. This phenomenon has been well understood at least since the time of the British enclosure movement, which forced small farms off their land into factory work. Growth and mastery came only to those who vigorously self direct, initiating, creating, reflecting, freely associating, enjoying privacy. These are precisely what the structures of schooling are set up to prevent on one pretext or another. As I watched it happen, it took about 3 years to break most kids. 3 years confined to environments of emotional neediness with nothing real to do. In such environments, songs, smiles, bright colors, cooperative games, and other tension breakers do the work better than angry words and punishment. Years ago, it struck me as more than a little odd that the Prussian government was the patron of Heinrich Pestalozzi, inventor of multicultural fun and game psychology, elementary schooling, and of Friedrich Froebel, inventor of kindergarten. It struck me as odd that J.P. Morgan's partner, Peabody, was instrumental in bringing Prussian schooling to the prostrate South after the Civil War. But after a while, I began to see that behind philanthropy lurked a rational economic purpose. The strongest meshes of the school net are invisible. Constant bidding for a stranger's attention creates a chemistry producing the common characteristics of modern school children: whining, dishonesty, malice, treachery, cruelty. Unceasing competition for official favor is in the dramatic fishbowl of a classroom, delivers cowardly children, little people sunk in chronic boredom, little people with no apparent purpose for being alive. The full significance of the classroom as a dramatic environment, as primarily a dramatic environment, has never been properly acknowledged or examined. The most destructive dynamic is identical to that which caused cage rats to develop eccentric or even violent mannerisms when they press a bar for sustenance on an apparodiac reinforcement schedule, one where food is delivered at random, but the rat doesn't suspect. Much of the weird behavior school kids display is a function of the periodic reinforcement schedule, the endless confinement and inactivity to slowly drive children out of their minds. Trapped children, like trapped rats, need close management. Any rat psychologist will tell you that. This has been the effective methods that the enemies have instituted over us to keep us from ever coming to a grips of freedom, of self understanding, of identity. We instead are being raised by the very prison lords who would seek to steal, kill, and devour. And you know what? We, each of us, has a responsibility to seek our own education, to seek our own understanding. Like, the beauty of what we do have available to us is that I can still go and learn so much more on my own outside of those systems. I still can have access to these books. But you know what? There's coming times where they're engineering our society to where these things are outlawed, to where this types of information is hidden and concealed and secreted away or burned and blocked out, right? As hate speech, right? They don't want this type of information to be out there. But you know what? While it is still available, it's critical that we saturate ourselves in it so that we can give an answer to everyone who asks us to give a reason for the hope that we have. We should be able to defend the reason why autonomy in our education is a valuable, fundamental right to the person experience, to being mankind. This is a gift that our Creator gave us that we could go and learn and we can study and show ourselves approved. And by doing that, we really are changing so much of the spiritual hierarchy back towards the favor of what the kingdom of righteousness says. When we impart the truths of the history, when we regard the scriptures as our guidebook, as our absolute tool of choice for learning, for understanding, for all wisdom, we will find in there the keys that we need to unlock this cage that we have been locked into. I love you guys so much. I really appreciate you going on a wonderful journey with me today. And I hope you guys live dangerously every single day of your life. Because you know what? Redeem the time. The days may be evil, but you were born for such a time as this. I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon.